Hey everyone, George Haller is here, bringing you another video. This time we're going to be talking about shading. I'm going to make it in two parts. Part 1 will be the theory and part 2 will be the practice. Shout out to my TikTok follower that requested this video. So with no further ado, let's dive right in. When we talk about shading, this is what we are referring to. Shading is the translation of how light is hitting an object. This is what we use to transfer what we see onto paper. If it wasn't for that, all drawings would be two-dimensional and not realistic. The more shading we add to the mix, the more realistic it becomes if done correctly. So, let's learn a few ways to train that skill. If we did not have light, we wouldn't be able to see anything. And if we did not have shadows, everything would be two-dimensional, like this. We all recognize that shape. It is a coffee mug. But it is a lifeless drawing of it. What could we add to bring it to life? Light. So immediately, light creates shadows on the subject that our brain uses to calculate the shape and form of the object. Our brain is trained to do that automatically, and this is why we immediately start to perceive this as realistic. But we are not there yet. Notice, we still have the outlines. However, outlines are not found in nature, so this takes away from the result. Let's delete them. There you go. This is now a realistic mug. But wait a minute. If we do not have the outlines, how can we perceive shapes? Well, now we might not have lines to show us edges, but we have the shading that changes value at the edge. The bigger the difference of these values, the higher the contrast. Now that we have the basics down, let's see what we can do and cannot do with contrasts. As with everything, the best practice is to find the golden ratio. Not too much or too less, just right. If we have too much contrast, we end up where we started. We lose detail because we do not have space for a variety of values. We only have two, black and white. Although this could be used as an artistic choice, it is unusual for realistic work. On the other side, too little contrast makes the drawing flat. It is losing information from the shape and becomes boring. The golden ratio is found somewhere in the middle, maybe a tad towards higher contrasts, and that is because a higher contrast always gives a more dramatic and impressive look. I personally try to create high contrasts on my art. Before we continue, I would like to mention that contrast does not apply just to your subject. It applies to every relation between every visible object in the scene you are drawing, even if that is the background. Right now we have an extreme white high contrast background that is giving us nothing in terms of depth and perspective, but what happens if we introduce the table? We immediately have depth and perspective. Plus, the mug not only has contrast in itself, but with the background as well, making it even more pronounced and even more dramatic and interesting. It helps, especially when our subject is lit strongly from one side, like our mug here. The right side is so well lit that, without the background, the right side would not have an edge. By contrasting it with a darker background, we create that edge and the cup is more pronounced. Now that we understood light, shadow and contrast, we need to start training on how to see details. When we see objects, our brain gets the information, analyzes it, so to make a decision on what the object is and how far is it. The rest information is useless for the brain, so it discards them. However, when you are drawing a realistic piece, You need all the information you can get. All these details are what makes a realistic piece. For example, in our mug, did you notice that shadow? Or that line that changes from shadow to light? Or the shape of the shadow inside the cup? This should be your number one priority to develop. And you can develop this ability by analyzing your image and taking the time to draw a section at a time. Every new artwork you do, as long as you're actively looking for details, you will get better. And the better you do, the more realistic your art will be. We talked about contrast, so now we need to know what happens in between the two extremes, black and white. You need to be aware of the values you can achieve with the pencils you have. You should use a scale like that you make on the paper you're using so you can compare. This is an important skill to acquire, especially as you become better in analyzing your values. You should always try to use the correct pencil instead of pressing hard on the paper with the wrong pencil. Before I finish, I want to add an important element of shadows. Notice the shadow behind the mug. It blends into the background and it is soft. Now, notice the shadow on the cup. It is sharp on one edge and soft on the other. Remember, the closest the shadow is to the subject, the more definition it gives, and the further away, the softest it gets and it gives perspective. By the way, you can change that by using more direct light or more diffused light, but this is a photography subject and I will not get into it in this video. I just wanted you to know so you can realize how much you could improve if you start photography. It will help you so much. Anyway guys, I hope I gave you enough to start analyzing images and become better. The principles we talked about apply to anything that you are doing. Whatever you are drawing, you should be looking to identify all of these elements in the whole image as well as in separate parts of it. For example, if you're drawing a face, you identify your contrast, your values, your details, etc. for the whole face, and for individual parts of it, like the eyes, the nose, the chin, the wrinkles, you are the one to decide how detailed you want to be. And with that note, this is the theory behind shading. On the next video, I'm going to show you the technical tips and tricks on how to shade smoothly so you can apply all the theory you learned. See you on the next one.